Remember after-work happy hours, neon green cocktails, the flair era, and a sandwich so over the top it came with powdered sugar and jam? Well, that was Bennigan's, America's mall pub for Monte Cristos and 2-for-1s. But today, you'd be hard-pressed to find one, which is why the question we'll be tackling today is, whatever happened to Bennigan's? Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other restaurant chains you would like to hear about. If you're picturing a rosy-cheeked Mr. Bennigan drafting recipes in a Dublin cottage, fiddlers playing in the corner, and a kettle of Guinness stew bubbling on the hearth, sorry. There was no kindly Irish chef, and Bennigan's was born in Dallas, Texas. The name was a vibes-forward invention for an Irish-themed concept created inside Pillsbury's restaurant division in 1976 by a rising industry star, Norman E. Brinker. Brinker had already launched Steak and Ale and would later build Chili's into a super brand. But Bennigan's was his bid to turn the after-work casual dining pub into a category. At the time, casual dining was still a fuzzy idea. You had your white tablecloth steakhouses, you had diners, and you had bars. But the middle space wasn't yet carved out. Brinker and Pillsbury, however, saw an opportunity. What if you could package the social energy of a bar, the comfort food of a diner, and just enough theme to feel like a night out? The Irish pub motif, shamrocks, dark wood, brass rails, was less about authenticity than about giving Americans something that felt cozy, festive, and maybe a little exotic without being intimidating. Bennigan's was a place where you could take your coworkers after clocking out, your parents for Sunday brunch, or even a first date if you didn't want to overthink it. And it worked. The early Bennigan stores didn't just serve burgers and beers. They served up a new kind of ritual. Happy hour wasn't just a discount, it was a destination. Those giant booths and sprawling bars gave suburbanites a place to linger, laugh, and loosen their ties. The concept arrived at the exact cultural moment when office parks were booming, malls were magnets, and Americans were ready for something between fine dining and a greasy spoon. Bennigan's filled that void with a frosty mug and a deep-fried grin. Walk into a Bennigan's in the 1980s, and you'd know right away what you were in for. Heavy wooden booths, brass railings that begged to be polished, and walls that looked like a flea market had puked all over them. The menu was equal parts comfort food and party trick. Potato skins, fajitas still sizzling, onion rings stacked high enough to double as a table centerpiece. But the crown jewel was the Monte Cristo, a sandwich so outrageous it practically needed its own legal waiver. Ham, turkey, and cheese, dipped in batter, fried like a carnival snack, dusted with powdered sugar, and then, because why not, served with a side of raspberry preserves. At Bennigan's, your sandwich came with dessert, whether you asked for it or not. The Monte Cristo didn't start at Bennigan's, but the chain turned it into a signature spectacle. Most food historians trace it back to the early 20th century as an American twist on the French croque monsieur, basically a ham and cheese sandwich dipped in egg batter and grilled. By the 1930s and 40s, menus in California featured versions called the French sandwich or toasted ham and cheese. Disneyland gave it a theme park glow in the 1960s, serving a deep-fried version at its Blue Bayou restaurant. But it was Bennigan's that took the Monte Cristo nationwide, turbocharging the indulgence by powdering it with sugar and handing you jam to dunk it in, a dish that was equal parts entree and dessert, and unforgettable either way. The Monte Cristo gave Bennigan's an identity, but it was the happy hour that gave it a soul. 2-for-1 drinks, big frosty mugs, and crowds of office workers who'd pile in the moment the clock hit 5. In an era when after-work drinks usually meant a smoky dive or a pricey steakhouse bar, Bennigan's was the middle ground, approachable, affordable, and reliably fun. The booths filled with coworkers trading gossip, and the bar kept the pints coming fast enough to erase a bad day at the copier. And by the 1990s, Bennigan's was no longer a scrappy pub. It was a national chain with more than 300 locations worldwide. The franchise model helped it to colonize suburban strips and mall-adjacent parking lots everywhere. Along the way, it squared off against other rising stars of casual dining. TGI Fridays with its sugar-loaded cocktails, Ruby Tuesday with its salad bar Sneeze Guard, and Applebee's with its microwave sense of neighborhood. Bennigan's, however, held its own with a simple formula: feed you too much, pour you another round, and make you feel like you are part of the club. By the mid-2000s, Bennigan's wasn't just a restaurant chain. It had become shorthand for the entire casual dining universe. If you needed to set a scene in a certain kind of restaurant, the kind with laminated menus, flair on the waitstaff, and a side of mozzarella sticks that could double as dinner, Bennigan's was the cultural template. Take the 2005 comedy Waiting, where Ryan Reynolds and Justin Long sling plates at a fictional joint called Shenanigans. Writer-director Rob McKittrick drew on his own chain restaurant shifts, and while they never say Bennigan's, the DNA is all there. The flair, the birthday song, the exhaustion of the line cook who's been asked to sing Happy Birthday 12 times in one night. For anyone who'd ever spent an evening under those brass rails, it was painfully familiar. Then there's About Fate, a 2022 rom-com starring Emma Roberts, which filmed multiple scenes in a resurrected Bennigan's. To make it authentic, the production team actually hauled in decor and fixtures from Dallas, recreating the amber-lit pub atmosphere almost as an act of nostalgia cosplay. Watching the film feels a little like stepping into a Bennigan's preserved in amber, right down to the glowing shamrock sign. Pop culture has kept poking fun at Bennigan's too. South Park has used it as a punchline for chain restaurant mediocrity. Office Space gave us tchotchkes, with its never-ending debate over how many pieces of flair a waiter should wear. And of course, The Simpsons got in on the fun with Uncle Moe's Family Feedback. Whether as inspiration, parody, or punchline, Bennigan's helped scriptwriters and animators define what chain restaurant meant in America. If the rise of Bennigan's was a slow pour into a frosty mug, the fall was more like someone yanking the tap handle right off. On July 29, 2008, regulars showed up at more than 100 Bennigan's locations, only to find locked doors and hastily taped signs announcing the party was over. Long story short, the company's parent, S&A Restaurant Corp., had gone straight into Chapter 7 liquidation. No restructuring, no second chances, no nothing. Just roughly 150 corporate-owned Bennigan's shutting down in a single day, along with all its sister brand steak and ale restaurants. For the people inside the chain, it was chaos. Managers reportedly got phone calls at dawn telling them not to open, and some workers learned their job had disappeared when they saw it appear on the morning TV news crawl. Guests who'd planned birthday dinners and anniversary parties were left standing in parking lots, wondering how a chain that once felt invincible could collapse overnight. The franchise-owned Bennigan's, the ones run by independent operators, weren't technically part of the bankruptcy, so a handful kept their lights on. But without the scale, marketing, or corporate backbone, they were suddenly more like scattered outposts than part of a national pub empire. Over the next few years, many of those units quietly fizzled out, turning into sports bars, Mexican restaurants, or family diners where the Monte Cristo was tragically nowhere to be found. But why the sudden implosion? Did the luck of the Irish just run out? Well, Bennigan's had been struggling for years with the same problems dogging so much of the casual dining sector. Too much square footage, too many copycat menus, and too little innovation. When the Great Recession hit in 2008, middle-class families cut back on weeknight dinners out, young drinkers sought trendier bars, and the chain's debt-heavy owners couldn't absorb the loss. The cracks that had been forming for a decade suddenly gave way, and Bennigan's, once the life of the happy hour, became a cautionary tale of how fast a good-time brand can go dark. After the 2008 implosion, most people assumed Bennigan's was gone for good, another entry in the scrapbook of extinct chains. But like the Monte Cristo itself, the brand proved harder to digest than expected. A few franchise locations stubbornly kept the lights on, serving locals who weren't ready to trade their Shamrock mugs for Miller Lite at the bowling alley bar. Then, in 2015, industry veteran Paul Mangiamele and his wife Gwen decided to do something unusual. They bought the whole brand outright, wrapping it and its sibling Steak and Ale into a new company called Legendary Restaurant Brand. As Mangiamele told the press at the time, he loved Bennigan's so much he wanted to bring it back, like a fan who refuses to let their favorite sitcom stay canceled. But the comeback strategy wasn't to rebuild sprawling 8,000 square foot pubs in every suburban mall. That's the playbook that helped sink the chain in the first place. Instead, the new Bennigan's leaned into smaller footprints and franchising, spaces around 5,000 square feet, cheaper to run, and more suited to modern traffic. They even rolled out Bennigan's on the Fly, a flexible format that shows up in airports, hotels, or as a delivery-only ghost kitchen, meaning the Bennigan's experience could come to you. No Shamrock wallpaper or oversized beer mugs required. Today, Bennigan's exists in a patchwork. A handful of brick-and-mortar restaurants remain in the US, Illinois, Iowa, North Dakota, Texas, while international franchises in places like El Salvador, Mexico, Cyprus, and Bahrain keep the green alive abroad. The menus highlight the hits like the Monte Cristo, Turkey O'Toole, and Death by Chocolate, and the company talks openly about nostalgia as a business model. Whether that adds up to a true revival or just a fond encore is still up for debate, but for a brand once pronounced dead, Bennigan's feels oddly hard to kill. Bennigan's was never really about being the best restaurant in town. It was about being there, the place with enough room for your whole office, a Monte Cristo outrageous enough to brag about on Monday, and happy hours that stretched just long enough to forget you had to go back to work the next day. At its peak, the Shamrock sign felt as familiar as the Golden Arches, and for a generation of diners, Bennigan's was casual dining. Its downfall wasn't a single scandal. It was death by 1,000 mozzarella sticks, too much square footage, too little innovation, and the bad timing of a global recession. Yet the chain has proved surprisingly resilient. So what does the future hold? Hard to say. But if the Monte Cristo taught us anything, it's that Bennigan's has a knack for defying expectations. So what do you think? And what's the most over-the-top chain restaurant item you've ever ordered? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Weird History.